Good evening and welcome to the August 9th meeting of the Board of School Trustees for Fort Wayne Community Schools. The meeting is open to the public during Indiana's ongoing public health emergency as declared by Governor Holcomb. Masks are required for unvaccinated visitors. Social distancing is being practiced at the meeting, therefore some of the members of the public who wish to attend may be excluded. Priority for attendance in person will be given to the members of the media. This meeting is being simulcasted on cable Comcast 54 and Frontier 24, is being live streamed on our Facebook page and on our LTV 2454 FWCS YouTube channel. We'll begin our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Begin our roll call of members.
Good evening, Steve Corona, 5th District.
Hello, Riley Booker, 4th District.
Hello, Jennifer Mathias, District 2.
Maria Norman, Member at Large.
Julie Hollingsworth, District 1.
Noah Smith, District 3.
And I'm Ann Duff, Member at Large, and to my left is Angela Filler, the Clerk of the Board, and our Superintendent, Dr. Daniel. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, I believe we have a recognition of our summer activities. Fort Wayne Community Schools staff and students had a busy summer of activities and learning, so we will see a video presentation to highlight a few of those activities. Thank you for that, and I see the work never stops. Okay, we have our consent agenda. This is the approval of the minutes from the July 26th meeting, vouchers and payroll, vouchers ending for the period of August 9th and payroll for the ending period July 26th, and the personnel report. Is there a motion on the floor for approval?
Madam Chair, would move to approve recommend that we approve the minutes, the voucher, payroll, and personnel report presented to us.
Thank you.
Second.
Dr. Daniel, did you have anything on the personnel report you wanted to mention?
Yes, some updates in regards to personnel. As you know, we're in that time of year where we're hiring, I will say, a wealth of teachers and support staff. So we've done some numbers over the past 24 hours to update you. This summer, we've had over 400 postings this summer for additional positions, including virtual teacher needs. We've filled 82% overall, while our overall teacher fill rate's now at about 96%. So that's, we're very pleased what has happened the last 2 weeks. As some of you may know, we did have a surge of retirements at the end of July, so, but I think we've responded quickly, but we have some incentives in place that I'd like to let retired teachers know. There's a $5,000, if it's a whole year, $5,000 return to teach, stipend available for our teachers, and they return at what their salary would have been if they would have continued, i.e. if they retired with 30 years, they'd move in the 30-year slot, and whatever that current salary is for our today at 30 years.
You're tempting me.
Yeah, tempting, huh? So if you're interested out there, please. Special ed tends to be an area where there have been some new federal laws, so the new emergency permit law makes it more challenging for us. But if there are some teachers in that area, and we've created some incentives as well within our system for special ed teachers. So if you're interested in examining some of those incentives, now's the time. Subs, we're always interested in subs. We're looking into the sub scenario. Do we create some incentives, additional incentives there? There'll be more to that, but again, subs, as we look at filling our teachers, we always are needing subs. And we have probably I think our rates are probably the highest in the area. And again, we're now allowing it to be very flexible. So maybe you're AM sub and you're partnering with someone who do PM subbing. We're doing the same thing with our teachers. You can be job share, and we're very interested in being as flexible as possible so you can enter the job market and assist us, as well as with our instructional assistants. So we're about 68% in filling instructional assistants at this time, and that's a rather large number because we employ over 323. So definitely, but that's fairly consistent with what's happened in years past. Bus drivers, again, we have 11 in the queue for hiring. We have 7 more with CDL training, 1 more starting 8/16. Again, we have some incentives there as well. It's a great place to learn. You can become you can work as an assistant on the bus, i.e. An aide on the bus while you're in training for your CDL. So you can be paid while you're receiving your training. So those are the primary areas right now in our personnel, and everyone's trying to find workers. But hopefully you'll look at Fort Wayne Community Schools, the flexibility and incentives that we're providing, and we'd love for you. And on our front of our website, you now click right there in the front, and it goes to the location of jobs. So we made that adjustment on Friday as well. I think it was Friday, or maybe a few days before. No, it was Friday. And so it should have, again, easier access for you if you're looking for those jobs. So that's it. Thank you.
So if I'm a retired teacher and I find another retired teacher to job share with me, we each do half days, do we each get a $5,000, or do we have to
I think you have to split that. You'll have to split that, but
All right.
you can always negotiate.
All right, so retired teachers. There's something for you to do now. Okay, so we have, I'm sorry, we got to prove it. All in favor of the consent agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now moving on, no old business, so we'll go to new business. It is recommended that the board approve the contract for the Guaranteed Energy Savings Project HVAC improvements at Abbott, Brentwood, Fairfield, Holland, Indian Village, Maplewood, North Crest, Shambaugh, and Washington Elementary Schools, and Northwood and Portage Middle Schools. The total contract is for $15,308, $308,873, and the automated logic is $2,858,000. This project primarily includes the replacement of classroom unit ventilators and HVAC building relief fans at 9 elementary and 2 middle schools. Work also includes the replacement of the windows, classroom ceiling, and lights at Holland Elementary. The existing building automation systems controls are proprietary, and automated logic is the single source vendor for the work. All systems replacements will be replaced with energy efficient equipment and systems with a payback period of under 10 years. The work will be completed by August 2, 2024. The projects will be funded from the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Education Relief ESSER 3 grant. Requests for proposals were sent to multiple prospective vendors with 4 vendors responding. And questions will be answered by Darren Hess. Is there a motion on the floor for approval?
I move approval.
Second.
Thank you. And does anyone have any questions for Darren?
Darren, were the 4 vendors local or state or the area?
No, the vendors for a guaranteed energy contract have to be certified with the state. There's only one local vendor that is certified with the state, and they chose not to submit.
Okay. And how were how were the schools chosen? What was the criteria?
The age of the equipment and the conditions of the spaces. We randomly tested all of our buildings last year multiple times for CO2, and these were buildings that constantly were on our radar of needing additional mechanical work for the units. We couldn't we couldn't make do with the existing equipment, so we have to replace the equipment.
Will this be something we'll continue to see over the next few months as we do more of the schools, or this should be it for this type of project, or
We're just the beginning.
Okay.
We'll have at least 7 or 8 more projects to come in over the next couple of months with ESSER funding for ventilation, air quality type projects.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moving on to renewal of insurance policies. Noah?
It is recommended that insurance coverage for boiler and equipment breakdown, property, general liability, inland marine, business automobile, crime, cyber, and privacy liability, educators, legal liability, and excess liability be awarded through USI Insurance Services to 3 underwriting carriers for a premium of $1,161,413. The Cincinnati Insurance Company will underwrite the boiler explosion equipment breakdown policy. HSB Specialty Insurance Company will underwrite the cyber and privacy liability policy. American Family Home Insurance Company will be our insurance company for all their policies, and Wright Specialty Insurance will remain the underwriter. Total premiums increased $74,706, about 6.8%, with the renewal being effective September 1, 2021. Steph Pittenger will be here to answer questions.
Thank you, Noah. Is there a motion on the floor for approval?
I move for approval.
Second.
Thank you. And do we have any questions for Stefan?
Was there a specific area, Stephen, where the increases we saw greater than others? I see overall went up about 7%, but were there certain factors that drove it higher?
Yeah, one of the areas that we saw an increase is cyber insurance had a bump that's common in the market right now. There's the insurance companies are really, that's a hard market, and they really took a look at our securities in place, security measures in place, and did renew our policy, but it saw a significant increase. CJ Mills is here, our agent. Would you want to comment on any of the other increases we had?
Yeah, it doesn't take much time in the news, right, to see what's going on. So the other biggest line was property. We've got a large property schedule, so that's reflected in that increase. I do want to point out, though, and in credit to Stefan, Kathy, David, and the team, in 2019, we negotiated a 3-year agreement. So if you guys can remember back in 2019 when COVID didn't exist, when Texas didn't freeze over, when the pipeline wasn't hacked, we were able to lock our rates in with a certain rate cap. So doing that saved the district just about $175,000 over those time periods. That started for 19, 20, and 21. So we're reaping the benefit of that. I'll also comment, I say this every year, I don't want to be redundant, but it needs to be said. The team that is here is incredible. And it's the office all the way down to the teachers, the folks that really are in the operation at all levels. We are recognized every year by our carrier as being best in class. We represent a good number of schools in the state, and Fort Wayne Community School rates are the lowest here, which if you think about just the number of buses and students, I mean, that's something to be really proud of. And so in combination of the rate lock, just the awareness that we have, the stewarding of the resources, that those rate increases could have been a lot worse.
So if we had a rate lock, why do we have, increases, I guess?
So, great question. Should have clarified. So it's within a 5% deviation subject, and that is for the package line. Cyber was not part of that. The reason for that, there's reinsurance and some things that they can't necessarily guarantee. But very, very good question. That's a deviation.
And you said we're rated one of the lowest risk categories in other school districts?
When you benchmark it against our other schools in the state, and then our carrier will also benchmark it. Now, it's a little bit harder. The district in New York is a little bit different than Indiana and California, as you can imagine. But when you look at the number of students, the number of buses, our property schedule, our rate average is in the lowest tier.
So you mentioned that that is a 3-year, and this is the last of the 3-year, the 2021. Then will you have we have another opportunity for another 3-year rate lock?
It's a very good question as well. We'll see. The market is a bit wild right now. The one advantage that we have is we'll go out to the market. There are carriers that would love to work with the school district here and have that in their portfolio. So we'll leverage every resource we have to do that. I'll tell you though, our carrier said it was the only rate lock they gave in the country. I don't know if that is for sure or not, but the underwriter indicated as much, and I can tell you there isn't another rate lock in the state.
Thank you.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and Julie, the non-English speaking program grant.
It is recommended that the board approve the acceptance of the non-English speaking program grant for 21-22 in the amount of $1,325,696.96 from the Office of English Learning and Migrant Education of the Indiana Department of Education. The non-English speaking program grant is state funding allocated annually based on the number of English learner students in Fort Wayne Community Schools during the previous school year. Funds for this grant will allow for the continuation of a range of services for the district's English language learners program. The funds in this year's grant are specifically designated for personnel, professional learning, instructional materials, and translation. This non-competitive grant was written by Emily Schwartz-Kearns, Director of ELL, and she is available to answer questions.
Thank you, Julie. Is there a motion on the floor for approval?
Move we approve.
Second.
Thank you. And do we have any questions for Emily?
How many kids do we got in the ELL program, roughly?
I have the numbers because I know you always like them. Our funding is based on just over 3,200 students from last school year. This year, we're starting the year with about 3,000, which is about where we were last school year, but we have to identify the new students coming in, including a lot of new kindergartners. So we anticipate being at least as high as we were last year.
So that's about $415 per kid. Is that adequate funding, do you believe or feel? Or I know it's what we get, but...
Right. The non-English speaking program state funding actually has a tiered formula where we get more per student for students at proficiency levels 1 and 2, the lower end of the spectrum as they're beginning to learn English, and a little less per student at the levels 3 and 4, higher levels. So that's about an accurate average. It is not enough. We pay 6 building-based ELL teachers out of this grant, and we have about 80. So as Kathy will tell you, the grants pay a very small portion of what we are required to do. But it's good that we have it.
Where do those 3,000 kids fall in those 4 categories? Are they evenly allocated or found?
We have more students at levels 3 and 4. What you tend to see is students come in and start learning English. They will progress fairly quickly out of the lower proficiency levels, and it takes a lot more refinement of their language and generally more time. So the funding this grant was based on, we had level 1 and 2 students, just over 1,200, and level 3 and 4 students, just over 2,000.
How long do they stay in one of those categories? What's the average?
It's hard to say. Students tend to progress out of levels 1 and 2. It might be a year or two there. We have students who never exit the ELL program before they graduate because the bar to reach a level 5 or what's considered proficient is very high, and they can be successful without reaching that bar, but what we know once they reach that level 5, they are tremendously successful, so that is certainly our goal. But research says 5 to 7 years to reach full proficiency, but it varies greatly.
Did we have any specialized ELL programs as part of our summer program, or were those students just included in our standard summer program?
We didn't have a separate program. ELL students were included in our programs at all levels, and we did have ELL teachers specifically to support the language development at both of our K-8 sites over the summer and some of the high schools as well.
Anything else? Okay, thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and Maria, Title III, Language Instruction for Limited English Proficient and Immigrant Students.
It is recommended that the board approve the acceptance, or approve, there's words missing, the application for and the acceptance of Title III Language Instruction for English Language and Immigrant Students grant for the 2021-22 school year in the amount of $446,484 from the Office of English Learning and Migrant Education of the Indiana Department of Education. The Title III grant is federal funding allocated annually by the Indiana Department of Education based on the number of English learner students in Fort Wayne Community Schools during the previous school year. Funds from this grant will allow for the continuation of a range of supplemental services for the district's English Language Learner, or ELL program. The funds in this year's grant are specifically designated for supplemental instructional materials, professional learning, and family engagement. This non-competitive grant is written by Emily Schwartz-Kearns, Director of ELL, and she is still here and available to answer our questions.
Thank you, Maria. Is there a motion on the floor for approval?
Move for approval.
Second.
Thank you. And do we have any questions for Emily about this grant?
So, with respect to family engagement, might that include conversations with families about registration for 21st century scholarships?
It certainly could. The funds in this program that were for family engagement were mainly for some, well, what we've used them for in the past is mainly for some summer outreach to our newer immigrant and refugee families, and we help make sure they know where their school is. Even the families who have been here, we find sometimes they don't even know the name of their school, so we make sure they have information on the name of the school, their children's grade levels, who to call if their child is sick, and procedures for that. We give them some materials that they can work with at home. But 21st Century Scholars has not been a focus of that. One tricky point we have to remember, though, with the Title III funding is purely supplemental, so we can't use it for interpreting for things that we are doing for all students. We're required to provide interpreters from other funding. If we did something specifically for ELL families, then we could use Title III funds for interpreting.
What percentage of that grant is used for family engagement?
Oh gosh, as far as percentage, it's probably about 15%, I will estimate.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and Jennifer, Special Education Grants 2021-22.
It is recommended that the board approve the acceptance of special education grants from the Indiana Department of Education for the school year 2021-2022. For FWCS, the Part B Special Education Grant amount for the 2021-22 school year is $8,771,144. The Preschool Special Education Grant is $312,415. Funds are used to support salary and fringe of approximately 130 staff members. These non-competitive grants are in addition to the Special Ed Foundation payment. Dr. Nikki Sprunger, Assistant Superintendent of the Diverse Learners, will be available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Is there a motion on the floor for approval?
approval.
Second.
Thank you. And do we have any questions for Dr. Sprunger?
How many students do we have in the preschool special education program?
Last year, with COVID, we had a lower number. We have slightly over 300, and we expect that to be up closer to 400 to 500 because we have a large number of walk-on speech students that we serve. And last year with COVID, they did not come for that service. So we do have a very large number of pre-K students.
And are they identified as diverse learners? Like that? Are they identified as diverse learners before
Yes.
they come to the preschool or as they get in there?
Well, they're identified for special education, and they can follow into one of 17 eligibility areas, as well as speech only.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and that ends our business portion of our meeting. And now, Deputy Superintendent Faye Williams-Robbins will provide board members with an overview of recent efforts made to improve the accuracy and consistency of student assessment and grading practices within Fort Wayne Community Schools. Thank you.
Good evening, Superintendent Daniel, President Duff, and board members. I'm Faye Williams-Robbins, Deputy Superintendent, and tonight I'm going to be giving a grade scale update. Our agenda tonight covers, try that again. It covers why we should change our Fort Wayne Community Schools grading scale and the proposed changes that we'd like you to consider tonight. So why make these changes? There's a lot on this page, but basically grades should be based on outcomes rather than practice. Grades should be determined primarily on a variety of end-of-unit and end-of-course assessments. Assigning zeros for missing work when using the traditional 0 to 100 point scale misrepresents a student's academic performance for several reasons, including the fact that 0 to 70 interval is much larger than any other interval that we find on our grade scale. The net effect is that missing coursework and low F scores are weighted several times more than completed work of a similar value. So for students, it basically means there's a disproportionate count against you when you receive an F than for you when you receive an A. In order to address the 0 to 70 interval and make the grade scale equivalent to what is commonly used in other school districts and colleges in our area, and to ensure that Fort Wayne Community Schools are not disadvantaged in comparison to students from other high schools, especially as we consider their competition for entry to college, as we consider scholarships and things of that nature. Our students having to, last year, a 70 would have been a D-, but the school districts around us, a 70 was the bottom range of a C. And so for those reasons, we felt that we needed to review our grade scale, meet with our teachers union, talk with folks within the district, and make some adjustments. So the proposed changes. For high school, and I start here because high school several years back, and some of you who've been on the board for a while or in the community and had students with us, we went through what we called High School Reinvent, and we had a Smaller Learning Communities federal grant to do some work specifically with our high schools. Part of that work was developing a grade scale that showed those equal intervals so that, again, we didn't have an F disproportionately counting more against a student than an A would. So this is the proposed scale for this coming school year. And as you see, we are now at 59 as the bottom of our scale instead of 0 to 69. And so that moves it up 10 points. But one of the things that teachers at the high school level specifically, as we had these conversations this summer, wanted to say to us was that when a student received that bottom score, there were times that parents said, well, they have an F, which means they turned something in. And so the teacher said, is there a way that we can add something below that that shows parents right away that their student did not turn those assignments in? And so we added the NS, which is a value of 40, keeping those intervals equal. And so if a student does turn that work in within the time frame that the teacher allows, then that grade can be moved upwards. If they do not, it remains at a 40%, and then it's calculated into the overall grade.
So Faye, just to be clear, so when a parent sees an NS, which stands for?
Not turned in, basically.
Right,
We were,
not
yes.
submitted. Yeah, so So if a parent sees an NS, they should be asking their student, why didn't you turn this in?
Right, exactly. And so now we have a way to delineate between I received an F or I just didn't turn anything in.
Right.
For middle school, you won't, or this is elementary, pre-K 2 uses the E's, the S's, and the U's, and so this is how these would equate to the percentages in the grade scale. And I know there'll probably be a question about that 0 to 59, so I'll finish these next couple of slides and then take that question. Also in elementary 3 through 5, pretty much the same configuration, and then our middle school, the same configuration. So one of the reasons that we did not change this all the way across the board yet is because we had lots and lots and lots of conversations with teachers, brought their voice to the conversation before we made any changes with the high school. That has not happened yet with middle school and elementary, but we plan to have those conversations this school year and then make adjustments. We already have some principals and people saying, well, why don't we get the 40 as a bottom? And those are things that we're looking at, but we did not want to do that without having teacher input and having principals know, because to roll that out without having them at the table could probably cause more questions than answers at this time of the school year. So we are going to be looking into that as we move into this school year.
If I'm taking a high school class in middle school, will the high school scale be used?
Yes, yes.
Is there any way for a middle school teacher or an elementary teacher to denote to a parent that the child has not turned in the assignment as, I mean, aside from it just being a 0?
Not at this point. That was not part of this conversation, but certainly something we need to take into consideration. Elementary teachers are a little bit quicker in getting with parents and making sure that they understand that their kids are missing assignments and those kinds of things, because it's just a little easier when you have one group of students for the entire day. And so for the most part, they've been doing a really good job of that. But as we revisit this with middle and elementary people, we want to make sure that we're aligning both of these.
Is our high school scale consistent with the other 3 districts in the county?
Yes, yes,
Or it will be?
yes,
Okay.
And based on that scale, I'm assuming we're at the 4.33 scale.
yes,
So that we are
absolutely.
aligning, college aligning
Correct,
and the other districts.
right.
Do you see this middle and elementary, upper elementary implementation happening at the end of the semester or not until next year, or?
We'd like to get it done as soon as possible, but semester break would be the best time to do that. But again, we want to make sure we're not doing something that's going to cause more questions for teachers coming back here this fall than necessary, and then we'll make those changes.
What do you see as the pitfalls of this change, or do you see any pitfalls?
I really don't. I think, and Sandra Bowles is here, and we've been in conversation with the teachers. We actually had Todd Croft come, who's a math teacher, and do some calculations to figure out how this works in comparison to what we've had, what we currently have. And the teachers, and I don't want to speak for Sandra, but they seem to be pretty pleased about the changes that we've made.
Would you echo that, Sandra?
Yes.
As a parent, I appreciate the NS because I can get on my daughters easier. It says not submission than that, so I do think that's important.
Right.
And I have middle schoolers, so I encourage that for middle school as well, because I think there's a lot of times it's very hard for us to see that if it's just not done, if it's out there still, or I don't want to personally see it in NS, but I'm sure that parents would like to know exactly where their child is at, whether or not it's not submitted or it's just a 0 or
Yeah.
40 or whatever it is.
Correct. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So if I'm a high school student and I take a test and it's not my best effort and I earn like 35%, what
The teacher then
what do I
goes
get?
in and changes that to a 59.
Change to a 59.
Yes, yes.
Wow. My other question is there flexibility for like advanced placement and IB? Like I know when I taught AP Calculus, and advanced placement told us that our scale should go all the way down to 50 because that coincides with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 advanced placement score.
That has not, that did not come up at all in our conversations, but we will make note of that because we do know that there are some differences in some of those special courses, so we will make note of that.
Okay, thanks.
So students can still retake tests for a better grade?
Yes, and that's one of the things in talking with Dr. Daniel that we want to encourage, that whole philosophy around giving students a second opportunity and within that unit, and that was part of the conversation we had with high school. There's a whole philosophical piece around this and research around assessments and grading that we just haven't had the time to do with middle school and elementary, and so we want to do that. But absolutely giving students an opportunity to better their grade by giving them different work that shows that they have gained new learning, and then being able to be assessed on that and bump their grade up if they can.
And so we don't average the grades, they get the better of the two.
That's what we've been doing, is they get the better of the two.
And we still have the 80%.
80-20, yes.
Will the 80-20 be looked at in the future?
We talked some about that, but I can tell you what the experts say, which probably is something teachers would not like, and that it should be 90-10. Nobody likes to be assessed while they're learning, and then that become part of your grade, even as we talk about teachers and evaluations, things of that nature. While they're learning, they shouldn't be penalized. And so the same thing is true with students. While they're in that learning mode, that should not count as much towards their final assessment of what they have learned as what they've learned. And so we went 80-20, and that was all part of the conversation years ago. But I can tell you, when you talk to folks about how you make that better, it really is 90-10, which is something that would be probably hard to get folks to agree to.
If we don't focus on like the 80-20, but the work that actually has to be done up until that point as the kid is learning, and I'm all for people messing up, because I probably took fourth grade fractions and probably did the one 50 times before I got it, before I moved on, and I took it over, and that was way back when. And so, but I was still tearing in my work for that. So I guess where I have the biggest concerns are that soft skills that we're trying to teach the kids, accountability, and also how does if a child figures that out, the 80-20, and does not turn in their daily work, how does the teacher know exactly where they've messed up at? I mean, where they don't understand, if they're not even turning it in, and they're smart enough to figure out, oh, at 20%, I don't have to turn this in, or I can do okay and slide by or whatever. I know we've went to the NS, which is an amazing improvement, but I'm just kind of wondering about that accountability, and how does the teacher really focus and figure out where the child is messing up?
Yeah, and that's part of the need to wait for the others and even have more conversation with high school, because as we think about how we as a district are looking at our student achievement, one of the things we currently have is what we're calling an academic coherence team, which is made up of some of the cabinet members as well as people from assessment and systems and things of that nature. So as we look at what happens at the school level and say to directors, here are some schools that you really should be zeroing in on because of where they fall within that group of elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, then our work is to hand that to directors and say, you need to get into the buildings, and give them time to do that this year. Get into the buildings, sit down with principals, look for root cause, and then dig deeper into the data in order to try to figure out what's going wrong. Is this an academic piece? Is this an attendance piece? Are kids being put out of the classroom too often because of discipline? And so as you begin to look at the root cause of these, that causes you to dig deeper in and find out. And that then can lead to what's happening in this particular classroom with these particular students, and then how grades are given across the board. We need to do more as a district around just having that assessment conversation. How many summatives do you give? How many formatives do you give? Why do you give them? And then what does that mean? And as teachers are working with students all along the way, they should be looking at, why is this kid continuing to get these kinds of grades? I had a kid when I was a classroom teacher that kept getting the numbers wrong. But then when I would work with him on math, he would get them right. And what I realized is he was inverting numbers. And so he was never going to get the right answer. And so until you get to that point where you're sitting with kids and going through and trying to dig into why they're getting the grades they're getting, we're not going to get the traction that we need to get. So it has to be at the granular level to be able to work with kids, look at that data, and dig really deep with building principles. Other questions?
Well, thank you very much, Faye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
And next, Superintendent Dr. Mark Daniel will update the board on the COVID-19 as it relates to Fort Wayne Community Schools.
Good evening, board, again. So I'd like to preface this PowerPoint with two primary goals. So as we're looking at our current situation with COVID, and across not just Allen County, but the state of Indiana and across our country, really two main things came to surface. Number one is, how do we keep kids in school? Number one, we know that when kids aren't in school, when we went virtual, learning was, should we say, we struggled. We struggled both as professional educators, and our students struggled, our parents struggled, and quite frankly, when students are home, parents are home, our economy struggles. So, primary goal number one, how do we keep students in school? Primary goal number two, how do we create an environment where our teachers and staff are there on a regular basis? There are times last year when we had we had to look at, can we deliver food services? Can we actually have enough teachers in a building to where classes could continue? Or are we going to have to perhaps shut down a building for a week to 2 weeks because of lack of teachers? That trickled into substitutes, it trickles into every staff member. So those are the two primary goals as I'm going to present to you and where we're heading for fall of 21-22. So, with that said, let's look at the first one and recent changes. Well, we know there's Delta, another variant, and believe me, we're going to have Delta, we're going to have Epsilon, we're going to have Gamma, we're going to have other variants. So how are we going to deal with these? And that's the question. And I'm hoping, quite frankly, that eventually we do get down, or we do go back to where we were in June, very early part of June, when we as Allen County were blue. Blue several weeks, multiple weeks, and we saw spread almost coming down to, well, I think that one time 7 cases compared to the 100 cases we have today. So we know that this Delta variant is, yes, as you see there, greater transmissibility. It has a greater infection rate, and quite frankly, it has a bit of a greater spread. So, that's something new. CDC, from what we've been reading, and coming from the Indiana Department of Health as well, is saying, hey, here's some guidance, fresh from July 9th as well as July 27th. They're saying, same thing I just said. We know that students benefit when they're learning in school. And we know that vaccination is one of the tools, one of the factors that can prevent, it doesn't stop infection, but it helps reduce the symptoms. Thirdly, we know the 3-foot rule. We used to have the 6-foot rule. Now we have the 3-foot rule. And what they're currently saying about the 3-foot rule, you can use that rule if you combine it with indoor masking. So, when possible, try to have that distance of 3 feet. And quite frankly, if you can have more and more activities outside, please do so. And as such, outdoor, we're not even including mass outdoors. So, with that, let's go to what we have right now in our classrooms. Right now, if you look at, this is only 6 through 12. This is the most recent data we have. You're looking at percentages of our students who are vaccinated at around 5%. So, our students and our parents, if you look at this data, it tells me roughly 95 to 96% of our parents have said, I'm not going to vaccine my kid. That's a choice. That's a parent choice. I believe they should have that choice. But please understand what that data is saying. That means those students are coming into buildings without any type of vaccination. On the other side of that coin would be the adults. What's our staff look like? Our staff right now, teachers, were approximately 80%. So there's a vast difference between those two numbers. So I use those as key indicators as far as what is our guidance. Where do we head for 21, 22, for at least the start of the school year? So again, I cite those, the 19th and the 27th, and then on the 29th, we also had an additional update to that guidance, and it's saying, very simply, and this is from Dr. Sutter, and I'd like to actually read this, because I think this is powerful for us, and all districts in Allen County are trying to do something very similar, but we may have some variation. We recognize the difficult decisions that all of our schools in Allen County are facing regarding mask guidelines. Due to significant increases in local COVID cases, we strongly encourage all Allen County schools and school boards to follow the guidance of the CDC, the Indiana Department of Health, and the American Academy of Pediatrics by requiring masks of all individuals in indoor settings. Masking remains a powerful tool to decrease the spread of COVID-19 and other viruses. While no single tool will work on its own, we believe using masks along with vaccination, social distancing, hand hygiene, and regular cleaning of surfaces will likely decrease disruptions from infections and quarantines during the school year and reduce the risk of spread of disease in classrooms. And again, going back to the original goal, how do we keep students in school and how do we keep teachers in the classroom? So, we're back to the old model. What do we ask our parents to do on a daily basis? Please keep your children home if they are ill. Do not send them to school. That's first and foremost. Then, of course, you also have the hygiene factor. Wash hands frequently. Key things that we'll continue to do and continue to stress. We also, what do you do, what to expect when you are sick? Well, again, our school nurses, and we have them in each of our buildings, thank goodness, they will then work with each child to see is this is for all students and staff regardless of vaccination status. But we are going to work our nurses with each student. Yes, they'll be asked to get tested for COVID-19. Your school nurse can test you with parent permission, or they can help direct you to a testing site. Yes, if you do not get tested, you must isolate at home for 10 days and be fever-free with improved symptoms 24 hours before return. Now, what I'm asking of Mary Hess, and Mary's here with us as well, and she can address your questions. How do we reduce quarantine time? How can we reduce quarantine time? Again, going back to the goal is having students in the building as much as possible, in classrooms with teachers that are teaching. If you are not vaccinated, you're looking at, if we're going into the phenomenon of close contacts, you're looking at a 10 to 14 day window. Close contact is someone that's closer than 6 feet for longer than 15 minutes. The 15 minutes is cumulative over a 24-hour period. Now you know why we had so many students absent. We had over 11,000 students in quarantine last year. 11,000. So our nurses were very, very busy. Matter of fact, they were probably overwhelmed. But they still got up every day, did what they needed to do, came to work, worked weekends, because they were contact tracing. You can use 3 feet if everyone in the classroom is fully masked. This doesn't apply anyplace else, doesn't apply in the lunchrooms, it applies in that classroom. Early return from quarantine is only possible if you have no symptoms and you can carry out enhanced precautions until a 14-day quarantine period is over. And you look at those 5 factors there. That's going to be difficult to do. But we have to start thinking of how are we going to provide that 6-foot space, if that's what they're requiring, to get them back into our schools.
How are you going to do that?
Well, we're still discussing those topics. Do we have, again, is there enough space in a room to have 6 feet? And again, students, because we're going to get to the punchline here, which everyone's waiting for, punchline is we're going to mask. All staff, all students will mask from when they begin on the bus to where they exit the bus. Well, I suppose when they're outside they take it off, but once they enter the building. Now we have to figure out how do you create, again, those 6-foot spaces, because everyone's masked, but how do you create 6-foot spaces in your building to bring kids back? And that's tough, because many of our classrooms do not have 6 feet. Some maybe 3 feet. But again, we'll do our best with the goal of principals, how are we going to create space? So, that's with unvaccinated. Now you go to fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated, the guidelines are this. You do not have to quarantine, even if identified as a close contact of a positive case, as long as you are not exhibiting symptoms of illness. Yes, you have to show that you have the vaccination. Yes, you still need to be masked. And recommended COVID tests between 3 to 5 days after exposure. Now, everything still flows. If you have symptoms, stay at home. Stay at home. So what is our multi-layered prevention strategy? What are our multi-layered prevention strategies? And you can see them again, repeating them. Get vaccinated as soon as eligible. See school nurse for vaccination sites. Stay home if sick. Get tested for COVID-19. Follow all instructions. Stay home again if told to isolate or quarantine. Wear a mask indoors regardless if vaccinated until further notice. Stay social distance as much as possible. Clean hands. Sanitize much of our surfaces as possible. We'll continue that. Disinfectant of shared equipment. And again, try to be outside as much as possible. And I say that because I could see our performing arts, I could see our choirs, I could see our music, I could see, let's be outside as much as possible. Take students outside. Matter of fact, there's quite a bit of research in regards to outdoor classrooms, and it's probably one of the healthiest things we could do. And maybe that's something we practice routinely instead of as an exception here. So, that's what we are planning to do beginning Wednesday, August 11th. Fort Wayne Community Schools will have full masks for all staff and anyone who enters our buildings. So any questions you might have of Mary Hess or me?
When we talked about last year, Dr. Daniel, 11,000 students in quarantine, I want to make sure people understand that all of those 11,000 students did not have COVID, but may have been exposed.
Correct.
And do we actually know the number of those 11,000 students who actually had COVID?
It is the $50,000 question. It's really hard to get at because kids do get exposed at school, but they also get exposed in the community with their family. So it's really difficult to get at. I would say, I feel safe in saying that was a really low number. There are some sorts of activities at school that are a little higher risk than others. Some little tiny kids have a hard time staying away from each other. So we did see more spread within a quarantine group when we looked at those sorts of groups. Athletics, they participated at a different level, and those kids did have higher outbreak in the quarantine group. But in general, when you're looking at school, it was low. And it was, probably because we were doing all those things really well. We really enforced the illness rules. We wore our masks. We tried to do the best we could with distancing, and we worked very closely with the health department on contact tracing.
And as I recall, as we look at the daily numbers, I believe that Monday was a real high day when students did not feel well because of whatever they did outside of the school, correct?
In general, I would say that's true. Even in a non-COVID year, Mondays are always rough for people, and we tend to see more kids in clinic then. And we are used to supporting our children, especially when we have children that don't have good connectivity to healthcare. Sometimes school nurses are their first stop. And we took that to heart. Like Dr. Daniel said, we tried to work with our families, with our kids, whenever they needed us so we could direct them in the appropriate care.
Another thing along that line would be both middle school and high school are in hybrid schedules. So we literally had half of our student body, and not even half because someone chose totally virtual. So our buildings in the middle school and high school, they were very, I would say, almost like ghost towns. So even having 11,000, just think if we hadn't done what we had done. But again, we know we can't do that this year. The learning practically shut down. So we can't do that, not just to our students, but to our parents and for a greater community. So we have to do everything we possibly can to ensure that it's a safe environment as much as possible. Safe environment being as all the various guidelines we've just talked about. How can we do those things? Creating a healthy, sanitized, spacing as much as possible, but our kids have to get to school. And out of 11,000, Mary's right, it was a very small number, but we still had to go through those motions. Mary, do you have an option in regards to your quarantining? That's a question for you.
Do not have that because COVID-19 is a reportable disease. There are laws in our state that dictate what must be done. The health department has authority about quarantine, and we work very closely. We will do exactly what they say. I've really been proud of FWCS that we not only do what's mandated, but we do try to listen hard to all the recommendations because we care. Nobody makes up the rules. I mean, who would want to, right? Nobody wants to make them up. But we do take what CDC, our state and local health department, the American Academy of Pediatrics, who are the gold standard for children, are all telling us to do this. And so I am really proud that we're going to try and take that stand to make sure we protect everyone in our environment. Nobody likes it, but I do believe that it's something that could really make a difference for some of our families and keep that infection down, keep schools open, like Dr. Daniel said.
Are we going to try to make the application or getting shots as convenient as possible? Might we see clinics set up in schools or near schools?
Could, would, should, all of those things. We are really lucky. We have some wonderful partners that work with Fort Wayne Community Schools. SuperShot in particular has been very, very helpful. As you know, we have a SuperShot clinic within our Family and Community Engagement Center, but we also do some other great partnerships with them. And we have offered in-school immunization when parents want that, certainly always with consent, but we have done many projects like that and we can continue, both for COVID immunization and for routine required immunizations, because kids got behind on those also when we were closing doctors' offices and didn't have well child checks. So we're trying to take care of both those things.
So where are we right now? You can be as young as 12 and
12 and up.
Get a shot?
Yes, 12 and up. And you can get it. And they are talking about taking that younger. Nobody knows for sure when that will happen. I know Dr. Sutter at the health department thought possibly we might see some younger age groups be included maybe by September, October. So we'll just have to watch and see.
So if I want to get my child vaccinated, I can do that at the Faith Center?
You can for routine immunizations. COVID in particular just has a lot of rules about how you have to thaw and store, because only Pfizer is something we can use for kids. So that is still being done at SuperShot, but they will take walk-ins. They'll take adults at SuperShot. They're kind of known for kids, but they'll take the adults too.
Do we think that our numbers of percentage of kids is accurate to their health records? I just know for a fact that with my own children, it didn't necessarily show up there right away. So I just wondered how long it takes to catch up so that we might actually be a few more vaccinations than
I'm hoping, even as we speak, right? That's just kind of how I feel. It is a constantly moving target. Immunization in general and COVID in particular, because it's happening in real time. The data that Dr. Daniel shared, those are kids that are fully immunized on the day that we ran the report, and there certainly could be more since then, and I hope there are. School nurses really spend a lot of time in immunization world, and so we at a minimum look at that data monthly, but probably even more often when we're in a crisis like this. We have a lot of kids that had one shot that haven't gotten the second one yet. So anything we can do to promote and improve that will help us get through this next stage. And we watch so closely that there could come a time when we can start to remove some of those mitigation strategies because things are improving. We did that over the summer, and now we're backward a little bit, but we watch that constantly and I think try to respond as close to real time as we can.
I just encourage parents to take a look at that because, like I said, one of my child was both shots, and it took a long time for that
to
kind of
show
catch up.
Yeah.
And so then as a school district, we did not require or ask for vaccination records when we went through registration. Is that just up to the parent to provide that?
We do a lot of auto dialing for required immunizations in certain grade levels. So K, 6, and 12 are the biggies, although we kind of, I hate to use the word police, but we watch those all grade levels for what's required. Now, COVID, not required, just, recommended for those age groups. But for the required vaccinations, we communicate with parents as they're leaving 5th grade and going into 6th, so we try to get them ready. And then we auto dial them to remind them if they are indeed deficient. And we'll text message, email, anything we can do to remind parents. And as nurses return, they will start the personal contact to do whatever they can to support families to get what they need.
So I guess I'm going back to the COVID and not asking for that, but if a parent does not want their child to be quarantined, then it's recommended that they produce their shot record or the vaccination record to the school?
Since we haven't required it, we have not asked for that, but our database does talk to the state database, and so we know a lot of things. But what would normally happen is if a child was identified as a close contact, my job as the school nurse is to say, I'm sorry, you're quarantined. Are you vaccinated? And if they tell me yes, then we verify that vaccination and we can say, okay, you don't have to, but you do these things. That's how it's been working.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do we have any deaths to your knowledge from COVID last year?
I'm sorry.
Do we have any student deaths or to your knowledge?
No, thank heavens. I hope that does not happen. It's really hard to sometimes get good data on pediatrics in general, but Dr. Sutter did share with us not too long ago that about 350 kids die in the United States every week from COVID. And when you think about how many kids there are, it's a low number, but it's still scarily high to me. But he also shared if you had 100,000 kids that all had COVID, 5 of those would die. Now, we haven't had 100,000 cases, thank goodness. But if one's too many if it's yours, right? And so I think that's why we're committed to trying to follow the guidance to make sure everybody's safe when they come to school, at least to the best of our ability.
So switching gears from Mary, without the virtual or hybrid setup, what's going to be the services for kids on quarantine and how are we going to treat that? It's like good old-fashioned sick days in the past? Or?
So good old-fashioned sick days, yes. So again, tapping into our Schoolology or Power School, so student sees a lesson, and again, if I'm a student, if I have questions, I'm texting, I'm doing whatever I need to do, or I'm sending an email to my teacher and asking questions. So we're still working on the details of what that looks like. I can assure you that there are some teachers that they're probably going to be, if they start to see a large number of students, and they're out for 10 days to 14 days, you may see synchronized, at least here's my lecture, view my lecture, but after that they may that time disengage, which is perfectly understandable. So we're going to work through this process. All of our students are one-to-one, so that's a good thing. So we have that, and we have the hot spots that are also part of our families. So we all should have internet, and so there should be some connection there. Now, we'll see how this begins to roll, and we'll see what the absenteeism rate is, and we'll probably have some discussion with Sandra and how are we going to best meet the needs of our kids.
So at this point, there's no plan, no specific plan in place for kiddos who are at home for 2 weeks? You're leaving it up to the teachers or the schools?
The plan is that they will continue, just as we've done in the past. Here are your assignments. You need to work on those assignments. You need to email your teacher, communicate with your teacher. There is we will not have a virtual format for those kids like we did last year, where we had total virtual for elementary and total in-person for those. It's the quarantine is the issue. Therefore, you saw it on the screen here. If you're vaccinated, it's a very different world. Your out of school time is really related to your symptoms. So it behooves, if you see this happening, it behooves a person to have the vaccine. But I understand that's a choice. So as a choice, now it's just like we used to have when kids would go absent, would be absent, should I say, and they're absent. Where do I get my work? Before, the teachers would send it physically. Here's notes, go back. Now we have one-to-one, and they can see that information. Now, I would hope we, as educators, be it our support staff, be it our teachers, be it our administrators, are finding out where students are not connected and how to connect them. But that's going to be an ongoing process. And again, I can see some of our teachers saying, I'll do that, I'll just online, here's my period, come on at, 10 o'clock when class starts, you can hear the lecture. But it's not going to be the same as in person. We know it's not going to be the same as in person. So again, that's why we have to use these mitigation strategies to maximize student enrollment.
Okay, I'm just worried. I have kids who aren't able to get vaccinated because they're not old enough, and I can I'm just imagining how that's going to be if they have to be at home for 2 weeks.
So we are doing the cohorts, that whole phenomenon again, we are looking into having lunches into the elementary classrooms as we did last year. Really pleased how that worked. Buildings are working through that. Some may be in their cafeteria, some may be in the classroom. But try to keep that cohort as tight as possible, even on buses. So again, but you're right. We'll have to see what happens with this variant, and if we have to start creating some strategies in regards to, okay, and we are thinking of those, but nothing yet is in place to say this is exactly what we're going to do. I'd rather it come from building level and from our teachers saying, how are we going to address these kids that are in quarantine, and how can we do this together as a team? And it may require us to use our instructional assistants a bit differently as well. So I think we have hands that can assist. We also have, of course, the virtual platform that we're utilizing. If that's underutilized, maybe that's a key too. But again, each teacher's classroom may be in a different spot in regards to that particular scope and sequence. So it's hard to have, here's a package deal and this is how it rolls. It probably needs to be down to the classroom level, and let's think about how we're going to figure out, how we're going to continue to connect with our kids that are out 10 to 14 days. I just hope that, Mary, your other strategy too was how do we accelerate the 10 to 14 day mo? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, last year we really did stick to the 14-day quarantine. It is the gold standard, and it is what quarantine is by definition according to CDC. But there are some allowances to bring people back at 10 and 7 days. We were nervous about doing that last year because, you know, the community really had a high number of cases, and it didn't seem a good time to do the risk. But knowing what we know now, you know, Mr. Corona, you said that our quarantine, we didn't have a lot of spread within the quarantine group. I do think it might be a time where we can explore those options while we still keep a pulse, you know, make sure that we're not getting out of hand. But we are going to explore the 10 and 7 day quarantine and see how that works for our kids. So that may get some back quicker. They do have extra rules they have to follow when they come back in regards to masking and distancing, especially at lunchtime when the mask comes off. That's a little bit higher risk area, so we have to make sure they do have space if they're coming back early from quarantine. But we're going to explore those things. It really does have to be done on a case-by-case basis. If ever you needed a commercial for school nurses, I mean, this has been it. That nobody wants to look at the algorithms, including the nurses. The State Department gives us very colorful algorithms to follow, but they're complicated at best. And then when you add in the people factor and how a family actually plays out the whole story of how they got infected and what's happening in the home, those pieces are all vitally important to returning kids safely. And I do believe the nurses have really done a great job at trying to manage that in a discreet and confidential but very safe way for our schools. So thank you for the school nurses. I appreciate that.
I do have a question, but it's more along the lines of accessibility and access to internet.
Yeah.
Do we have a quick way to get a student Wi-Fi access if they don't have that available at home and they do need to go into a quarantine?
So Jack, do you want to speak
Jack.
to that one? That's a great question, especially with new students.
Yeah, we still have the same offering that we had last year. If a student, the family qualifies for free and reduced lunch, they are eligible to receive a Wi-Fi to take home.
And is that something that they would do through their school?
Yes,
or-
they request that through the school.
Okay. Awesome, thank you.
So along those same lines, computers, so we are one-to-one. Are our students able to take home their computers nightly? And because if we get the call that we've been exposed and now somebody has to get to school and doesn't have the means, so.
Yes, we are encouraging schools to send computers home for that very reason.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jack and his group have done really an unbelievable job, even in the elementary levels. You know, how can we have those devices also going home?
So when you say you encourage them to be sent home, do you mean like the way they were sent home at the beginning of the year, or send them home nightly, or just to make them accessible if one of the kids have to quarantine?
Well, we're encouraging them to be sent home nightly in the event that they do contract something and they might need to stay home. Then they have the ability to access their lessons from home.
Mary, you mentioned 11,000 quarantines, low number of cases actually and stuff like that. As a medical professional, what do you say to those groups of folks that are saying that's proof we really don't need these kind of things? And
I think what it proves is that all of those strategies put together made up a pretty good plan. And I know that there's some in this room that will laugh at me for saying this, but I love to use the Swiss cheese model because they tell us this at the State Department of Health meetings all the time. If you think of each of those mitigation strategies as a slice of Swiss cheese, there are holes in it, right? We know we're not going to be great at distancing this year, but if we add in the masking and we add in the stay home if you're sick and all of those other things, disinfection, hand washing, you get a pretty solid piece of cheese when you put them all together. It's not that there's no way for anything to get through, but it really does minimize the risk. And so I think people do need to keep that in mind, that it's the whole package that has, made things go as well. And honestly, we are taking the advice of the best experts at the table on this particular topic. You can find information from all kinds of people on the internet. They give you all sorts of things, but these are the people who are supposed to be able to lead us when it comes to public health and when it comes to pediatric medicine in particular. And I think that is something that hopefully will reassure parents to know that we aren't just trying to take a poll or do what is popular, because it's almost impossible to make everybody happy in this sort of situation. But I think when we're relying on experts like that, I hope that makes people feel confident in what we're doing.
thank you.
You all look beautiful in your masks, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions?
Let's hope for blue.
Yes.
Let's hope for blue.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mary.
Like you said, our goal is to keep kids in school, and we already knew that face-to-face was better anyway, but I think last year proved that. So I think, your decision is going to keep us face-to-face. So thank you again. And board comments?
No comment other than hopefully that our mask learning time is short in duration. But that's going to require a commitment by everybody to consider a shot if they've not done so, and to be mindful of how they're feeling. And if they're not feeling well, stay home.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Raleigh?
I am really excited for the start of the new school year. My students at home are too. They're really excited about being back in the classroom. I mean, it really is the best. It's the best for my kids. Just wanted to say that I support you and the administration and the rest of the board in just getting behind having the kids wear masks to school.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Just quickly, again, I have kids that are in school and they're very excited to go back. I'm sure there's a lot of kids who've been out for a while that are anxious, and maybe even Raleigh's children might be a little bit anxious too because they've been out so long. But truly, school is a lot more than just education to our kids. It is friends, it's relationships with teachers. I recently had somebody ask me about one of my favorite teachers or my most memorable teacher, and it wasn't because that teacher taught me to write cursive or do fractions or such. It was mainly the relationship that I had with that teacher and how the teacher, I saw that teacher as a mentor, and they were kind. And I guess that's what I just want to say is, I recently read that something that the sum of us can be more than our parts. Everyone gains when we work together. So in all of these divisive times of all kinds of issues, be kind, listen. Our kids need to be in school for each other, and it's more than just school. It's that relationship that they need and that we all need, so just be kind.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, echo Raleigh's comment that I'm super excited to go back to school, and so is my kiddo. New backpacks and new shoes and haircuts and all the, all the things. But I just also wanted to say, Mary, I haven't seen you in person for a while, so thank you so much. I know this is exhausting for you and your staff and the nurses, and so just thank you to you and your staff. And just want to say thank you to our teachers. In all of this, Mary commented that even one student or staff member, dying would be too much, and that's the one thing that always weighs on my mind. I want to do everything possible to keep everyone, the students, the teachers, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, security guards, everyone, as safe as possible. And so if wearing a mask, which I know everyone does not like, but if this little helps keep everybody safe, then I'll put it on every day, and I'll do it with a smile. So again, thank you so much to everyone in our buildings and everyone at Grile. I know that the beginning of the year is exciting, but it's also a lot of work. So just thank you to everyone.
Julie?
Yeah, just everybody have a great next week. Students are excited. Parents are probably just as excited to have their kids go back to school. I know that teachers and all our staff will be putting in a lot of work over the next week to get ready for Monday. But it'll be an exciting day. I know it'll be. I'm sure secondary students are looking forward to, being in class 5 days a week, even if they won't admit it. So I hope Monday gets us off to a great start to the school year.
I'll just echo everybody's comments. Good luck to everybody next week. That's it.
Oh, okay, thank you. And Dr. Daniel?
August 11th, we have all staff coming together for I'll just say a send-off. So our send-off to a new year, and our motto this year is culture wins. So by that, I think of really three things. How do we collaborate? How do we work together as a team? How do we also empower those that we've said we trust? And those three things can be very powerful when we make that happen. So you'll see that theme on Wednesday. I believe, Ann, you're going to speak a little bit as well. So thank you for that. Welcome, board members. We are going to be doing Facebook Live, but you're more than welcome to be here where we'll launch this. So 21-22, it's going to be a great year. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to August 11th. I'm also looking forward to visiting our schools on the first day of school. That was a great time last year, so I requested Northside High School again since I can show them the ropes and lead them in the right way, I hope. But thank you to everyone, too, for all the hard work in keeping our kids safe last year and again this year. And I know it's a tough decision that you just made this evening, but you have our support, and we appreciate all the hard work for keeping our kids safe. Is there a motion for adjournment?
Move for adjournment.
Second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That ends the business portion of our meeting. At this time,
closings, these forced vaccinations, you guys are literally making these children live in fear